So last week's exercises was simplicity, the idea being that most of us have too much stuff around our lives, and we tend to acquire stuff far more than we need. So were there any reports from the front on simplification? If you have things in order, I would imagine it would probably be easier to simplify. As I have told you many times, I like things on horizontal surfaces where I can see them. My wife likes things put away. So I am forever going out and replacing something that somebody has put away. So I wind up not being very simple because you get the idea. But yes, they are not unrelated. None of these are unrelated. They're all related to organizing your life and organizing your spirit and soul so that you're able more easily to do what God has called you to do. So you all couldn't find anything that you could simplify this week, eh? My particular tendency is I will go through a flurry of cleaning things up. I'll build shelves in the garage. Everything goes up on shelves, and everything is nice and tidy and clean, and I'll feel really virtuous for, maybe 2-3 days. And then stuff starts, the shelves are all full, but stuff keeps accumulating. And so I need to get rid of stuff. That's sort of the cycle of things, because we do spring cleaning, and you go through and you clean stuff out and so forth. I found that I was able to get rid of a lot of stuff when my aunt died. I didn't feel really good about disposing of her stuff because it wasn't my stuff, even though I wasn't using it, and even though the chances of her coming out of a nursing home and starting her own apartment up again were essentially zero. It still wasn't my stuff, and I didn't feel comfortable getting rid of it. So when she died, and all of it now belongs to me, I don't know how many trips we made to Goodwill. And in that process, we got rid of a bunch of our own stuff as well. When you're sort of in a cleaning out mood, you find that other stuff goes too. With me, though, as soon as I throw something away, 2 days later I find that I needed it. Moving right along. So what we're going to do this week is responsibility. I'm not going to do moderation. I thought about doing moderation. In fact, that was the first one I was going to do, and then I changed to responsibility. And I'm not going to do moderation. And the reason for that is all of Mussar is moderation. We've been talking moderation, so I don't feel any particular need to do that one specifically. In fact, what I am considering is probably doing the next one, which is faith, and then we'll end the Mussar for this season. So anyway, I was reading in the book on this one. The Hebrew word is akriut. I don't know if I pronounced that one right, but I'm doing it the best I can. And according to the book, there's 2 possible roots for that word. What the book talks about is the fact that there are 2 possible roots for that, and the discussion that engenders is in fact useful. So the first one is achar, which means after, and the other one is acher, which means other. And those are 2 obviously very different concepts. So what the book goes through is what each of those means in terms of responsibility and develops each one. So I will do it the same way the book does, because I think that was pretty good. So the first one is after, and what that talks about is time. The idea there is you are responsible for what flows from your actions. You do something, and what happens after you did whatever you did is something that you are responsible for. So the after part then has to do with time. There's a saying from Pirkei Avot, the wisdom of the fathers, who is wise? One who sees what is born. Now, what does that mean? Someone who is wise sees what will be born of his actions before he takes them. In other words, I see that if I do this, this is what's likely to happen, and I decide, well, maybe that's not such a good idea, because I see the consequences flowing from what I am considering doing might not be, or they might be good. I mean, it could be either way. But the point is, a wise man considers what he is about to do and sees into the future what the ramifications of what he is about to do are, and then adjusts his actions according to what his understanding of the future is going to be. That's wisdom. Stupid, simple examples. You've all had 2-year-olds. And you can just look at a 2-year-old and you can tell what's going through his mind. And you just know what's going to happen next. And a wise person brings that to himself. And he looks and sees, all right, if I do this, this is what's going to happen next. And I can either do it or not, depending on what I want to have happen is. The more wise you are, the farther out you can see. That's the essence of wisdom, if you will, to be able to see farther out than the average bear. Kay often tells a story about my daughter and I when I was teaching her how to drive. And she was backing up, and I could see that her wheel was going to fall off into a ditch. No big deal. I would be able to get it out, and the thump will wake her up, and she'll learn a lesson from this. And, of course, the thing that Kay says is I also didn't see that there was a bollard there, so we slid into the bollard and dented the car. The lesson wouldn't have been worth denting the car, and if I had seen the post, I wouldn't have let her do it. But without seeing the post, having the wheel drop on her and then having to back out would have been a good lesson. So it doesn't always work. There are some people who are wise and see ahead. There are some people who watch other people's mistakes and learn from those. And there are some people that just have to pee on an electric fence. Onward. When we get into Exodus, one of the things that always comes up, there's this long list of detailed civil laws. If your ox gores somebody, this is what happens. And if you steal this many sheep, that's what happens. And for lots of people, it's hard for them to see the spiritual value of God laying out what is basically civil tort law. That isn't very spiritual. What the Jews have taken from that is, if you want to be spiritual, what you do is you study that, because that's what teaches you how to treat your fellow man. As I've said before, you can steal a sheep anywhere in the world, and they will have a way to deal with you. You know, some places they'll cut your hand off, some places, whatever. Everybody has got a way to deal with you if you steal one of their sheep. What God does is he sets up what is fair and just on how you deal with it. All right, you steal a sheep, you replace 5 for 4. And it no longer becomes a matter of the angriest one wins. I've never actually seen the movie, but there was a clip from, I think, Lonesome Dove, and this poor guy finds somebody else's cattle roaming around and just rounds them up, and not particularly planning to steal them or anything, just getting them under control. And the rancher whose cattle they are is riding by and sees his cows in the pasture of this poor guy. And he goes berserk and shoots him on the spot as a cattle thief. What God does is he says, all right, I understand that if somebody steals your sheep, you're going to be ticked. But it is not, in fact, your decision what the appropriate punishment should be. It is my decision. And what I'll do is I will tell you, under these various circumstances, this is what the appropriate remedy is. And so what God is saying here is, if you want to be saintly, in this case, what you do is you study that, because that tells you how to relate to your brother or your neighbor. That goes all the way down to whose parking spaces. And of course, you're referring to the actor who has problems with self-control that got into a fist fight over a parking space in New York. And that's the point of this whole thing. We all rub each other the wrong way. Thing one is, if you studied torts, you know how to avoid, in most cases, rubbing others the wrong way. That's your sheep, that is not my sheep. So I will refrain from messing with that sheep because it's not mine. And that alleviates the conflict. But the other part of that is, when you do have conflict, it limits the acceptable range of action in relation to human emotion. this actor he's now going to be in court for misdemeanor battery, and he'll pay for it out of petty cash. So he's not learning a lesson. But he's got a problem with anger. And the whole point of studying torts is to minimize that by me not piling my stuff on the dining room table, because that would annoy Kay. That's her area. So what we do is we study, if you will, this is stuff that is important to her, and so I try and stay out of it. This is stuff that's important to me. She tries to stay out of that. And in the middle, we have to negotiate some stuff, and we occasionally get grumpy with each other. I mean, that just normally happens. But studying torts is a really good way of taking responsibility. And again, the Torah won't keep you from getting angry. But what it does is it gives you a framework for backing up and getting some perspective, and it gives you a framework for settling disputes. There's nothing in the Torah that says you won't have any disputes. In fact, Torah talks about your enemies. I mean, you'll have enemies, and that's not bad. So, motivation. There's two motivations for taking responsibility. The first one is fear of punishment. That's punishment in the here and now, and also punishment in the world to come. In other words, there are lots and lots of religious systems who terrorize you into behaving. That is regarded both by the Jews and by me as being sort of inferior. It works, but what's better is when you have internalized the rules and you behave responsibly because that's what you are. And so your responsibility is now internal as opposed to imposed from the outside. Now, going back to my 2-year-old example, 2-year-olds don't have much of a conscience. So with a 2-year-old, the motivation initially is fear of punishment. If you do that, you're going to get swatted on your bumper. But what you're trying to do is you are trying to bring that 2-year-old up and develop his conscience so that he continues to behave well, not because he's afraid of consequences, but because that's who he is. And I'm suggesting that as you look at this in the literature, at least according to the book, I haven't read the literature, I've read the book, the two big motivators for responsibility are fear of punishment, especially in the hereafter, and conscience. What I'm going to suggest is the last 6,000 years of humanity have started off with us being 2-year-olds, and what God has been doing is working with us for a long time to get us to the point where we behave well because that's who we are. And that's what God describes as having the Torah written on your heart. So you'll find lots of literature in the Jewish writings that talk about fear of punishment. And I'm going to suggest that that's earlier writing. That's 2-year-old is perhaps too harsh. Maybe teenager. 2-year-old with hormones and wheels are teenagers. So, at least according to the book, the consensus now is responsibility should be motivated by conscience, having your Torah written on your heart, as opposed to fear. But there are some people that you need to motivate by fear. You know, we're all in different places. All right, remember I said there's two possible origins for the word. So what we've been talking about is in time. Now we're going to talk about people, relationships. And what we're going to talk about is bearing another's burden, responsibility. Instead of taking responsibility because you see what's going to happen out in time, you decide to take responsibility because you want to help someone else. And it's in Torah. Somebody has probably talked about it. If you see your enemy's ox or donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying down under his burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him. So responsibility here now is responsibility to another as opposed to responsibility for consequences of your actions. Both of them are valid. One of the things that the book mentioned, which is kind of an interesting way of looking at it, a great many of the heroes in the Bible who get most of the ink are shepherds. You got Abraham. You got Jacob, you got Isaac, you got Moses, you got David, you got Yeshua, who's the model of a good shepherd. And shepherds care for others. And that's contrasted with the guy who was the poster child for not a shepherd, who was Cain, who says, am I my brother's keeper? And it's interesting that the first vignette in Scripture is, am I my brother's keeper? In other words, am I responsible for this? I got my own problems to take care of. I don't need to take on anybody else's problems. So that's the vignette, if you will, that sets the Bible in motion. And then, starting with Abraham, you have this story of shepherds going forward. And so what I'm suggesting to you is, what Scripture is doing is it's saying the normal, unrepentant human is totally self-interested. I'm not my brother's keeper. His problems are his problems. My problems are my problems. I don't need to do anything with that. And what God is doing is moving us from that attitude to an attitude of caring for each other. Rationalizations for not taking responsibility. I've just, sort of whopped 6 of them out there just real quick because those are the ones I could think of. I'm sure you can probably think of others yourself. I'm not my brother's keeper. It's none of my business. It's not my job. It's somebody else's job. Now, I have to temper that a little bit, both of those. You can also be a busybody, and that's not appropriate. What I'm talking about here is you see someone who has a need, and you rationalize not meeting that need because it's none of your business or it's not your job. Okay? Someone else will take care of it. I'll just keep going, and somebody will finally round up those cows. They'll get rounded up, or either that'll get hamburger, one or the other, and it'll take care of itself. I'm too busy. That's an easy one. Got stuff going on in your life, and to interrupt what you're doing for somebody else is a disruption. And so the idea that, no, I'm too busy, and no one will notice. There's a stray dog running down the street, and if I don't do anything, nobody will notice that I didn't do anything. The stray dog will still stay on the street. The stray dog will keep going on, and nobody will notice, and nobody will blame me. I can't be blamed for that. Or it's no big deal. Well, maybe it isn't a big deal to you, but it might be a big deal to the one that needs help. So just throwing those out. This is not a checklist for you in case you're needing things to rationalize. So this week's exercise, and by the way, feel free to make up an exercise of your own if you like. Suggested a possible phrase, it is my responsibility. And then don't go a single day without doing something for someone else. Whatever something is, you figure out.